Okay, so let me pull up my notes real fast. I have been taking over chapters 2 and 3 and how I'm going to connect them to the Bible. So, chapter 2 is called The Happy Housewife Heroine. Yay! It's actually a really good chapter. It's because I'm a journalist and I'm pursuing journalism here at Baylor. I really love this chapter. It's all about the things that influence the woman's occupation of being a housewife and mother in 1950s, 60s. Betty Friedan really goes into detail about her experience working as a journalist for different newspapers and especially magazines that really help influence this idea in women's lives. So why is it called the Happy Housewife Heroine? Well, basically means that there's a bunch of different things in a woman's life, a bunch of different things in society, in the media, that influence women. It goes from books to magazines to newspapers to little articles, especially on things that you will find when you buy stuff at the store. Stores mass produce a variety of things that were specifically for women, meant for the housewife. And so that was really interesting to read in chapter 2. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. These magazines include McCall's, New Women, Ladies' Home Journal, Good Housekeeping, Women's Home Companion, and Red Book. Okay. Women in these magazines, they would have articles and stories in them about women being heroines. And they would, it was really sweet actually. I read some of the stories that Friedan had talked about. So basically how the story would go is that there was a woman and she would fall in love with a guy. Oh yay. And then she would go and pursue some other goal in life. This was around like 1930s and 40s. Okay, these were the articles that were coming out then about heroines. So she would go and fall in love with a guy. Oh, wonderful. And then she would realize that she has a love for something else, like maybe flying a plane, or maybe getting an education, or perhaps studying abroad. Maybe she wanted to go travel to Paris and join a bohemian love group. I don't know. Something like that. Women would have goals and pursuits in life to do other things. Well, then the 1950s and 60s came along, and, the idea of housewife came into be, especially after the war, and it was like, okay, well, now we got to change everything around. So the idea for writing articles stayed the same. There was going to be a heroine who fell in love with one thing and also was in love with something else, was conflicted about it, and had to make a choice. But this time, the woman would, the first thing she would fall in love with would be studying abroad or getting an education or enjoying being independent in life. And then she would realize she had another love. Oh my gosh, a man was in her life, or wow, children are a possibility now. Like these other ideas of being of that housewife thing would come into play, and she would have to choose, do I want to be independent and have a career, or do I want to get married and have children and all that? And she would choose the marriage and have children. So that is how media really influenced women in the 1950s and 60s. They would say like, hey, you can choose between these two things, but having a career is wrong and being a housewife is right, so choose that. And that's what media would do to you then, especially magazines with these articles. Books would be written on this kind of stuff. Not true books, obviously. They're all false. And these women were definitely like on heroin or something to be writing books that said, oh, that my only fulfillment in life is being someone else's slave. For sure. But anyways, yeah. And there's a quote in chapter 2 that I want to read to you. It's on my laptop, so I'm going to have to pull it over here. All right. The new feminine ooh, my face is shining now. The new feminine morality story is the exercising of the forbidden career dream, the heroine's victory over Mephistopheles, the devil. First in the form of career woman who threatens to take away the heroine's husband or child, and finally the devil inside the heroine herself, the dream of independence. the discontent of spirit, and even the feeling of a separate identity that must be exercised to win or keep the love of husband and child. Okay, so from here we are saying that women basically the idea then was that if you wanted a career, that you were like from the devil. Like, what the hell are you thinking, wanting a career? And then you had, the feelings inside of you at that point that were bubbling up, wanting to have a career, wanting to be independent. Well, those were also the devil, and they had to be exorcised, from you. Like, go to hell, you evil ideas of career. That was the idea back then. Let's look at the Bible. We were talking about this awesome woman named Deborah, who was the queen of Israel, and then she defeated Jabin, the king of Canaan, with her army, who was a lot better than his, and then she basically had peace in Israel for about 40 years. Yay, Deborah! So anyways, I'm going to read a passage though from what we've read from Judges, which is Judges 4:9, which actually goes against what Deborah is all about. Deborah is putting herself down in this quote. She's putting down the sex of women, which it's very contradictory because she is fighting for her country. She is a woman. She's showing how independent and wonderful she is, but yet she says this thing, and it's like the complete opposite, and it makes us question things. So here it is. "Certainly I will go with you," said Deborah, "but because of the course you are taking, the honor will not be yours, for the Lord will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman." So Deborah went with Barak to Kadesh. Okay, after doing a little bit of research on this particular passage from the Bible, turns out Deborah is degrading women, basically. She is saying that you are falling into the hands of women, and because of that, you're falling into the hands of women. It's basically saying that women are supposed to be less powerful than men. Okay, we're not supposed to be, this fighting power, even though Deborah totally was. Very contradictory, I know. And basically is telling, her opponent that it's basically saying, because you are a man, I should not be able to defeat you, but I am. Instead of it saying, which would bring up women, which would, show that she is powerful, she should be saying, because I am a woman, I can defeat your army. But she's not saying that here. I found it very depressing. But the thing, how we're going to connect these two is that Deborah is a heroine. Okay, we have her story in the Bible saying that, she is pursuing being the queen. She's actually also a wife, and she is fighting against this army. She is wanting to bring peace to Israel, and she can do this, and then you have this little quote, and it completely contradicts it, and then we have the 1950s and 60s era, which we have these articles and stories about women who are heroines, and then all of a sudden we have this contradictory piece saying, instead of fulfilling your dreams, instead you should just be content with your role as a woman. Deborah is saying that too. You know what? Because I'm a woman, I'm not supposed to be able to do this stuff, even though she totally is. But that's what she's saying here, and it makes me upset to see her put down her own sex. It really does. It's basically saying that because of our anatomy, because I have female parts instead of male, society can tell us what our role is. I am supposed to fit this certain feminine role. I'm not supposed to be the head of an army, even though I totally am if I was Deborah. And, it's also, anatomy is also deciding how women should be in the 1950s and 60s. We should be housewives and mothers and nothing more. Our ideas, our dreams, our pursuits, any personality that we actually have should be suppressed. So that's the idea there. Moving to chapter 3, there wasn't a whole lot I got from the chapter 3, which chapter 3 is called The Crisis in Women's Identity. And yeah, there wasn't a whole lot that I picked up from this chapter, except for, one big chunk was her thesis, which I am going to read to you because it is just that good. I have to find it. I lost my place in the book. Yeah, found it after forever. Okay. It is my thesis that the core of the problem for women today, and here we're actually figuring out what the feminine mystique is. This is a big realization in chapter 3. It is my thesis that the core of the problem for women today is not sexual, but a problem of identity, a stunting or evasion of growth that is perpetuated by the feminine mystique. It is my thesis that as the Victorian culture did not permit women to accept or gratify their basic need to grow and fulfill their potentialities as human beings, a need which is not solely defined by their sexual role. She's basically saying that we're kind of like stopping our growth because women were confined to this one role and they weren't supposed to identify with anything else but that role. And some women were content, most were not. How I'm going to connect this to the Bible is a little more difficult. And if you have trouble making sense of it, please, leave a comment and let me know, because I want to try to figure out how to best connect these two things. But up until this point, we have talked about Abraham, Moses, David, the covenants and promises that they made with God, leading their people into new lands, new nations. They all have fulfilled their destiny that God has given them, which is great and everything, but what I want to look at is that all of these destinies that they have been fulfilling from God are a man's destiny. Okay, so let me read this to you. If it doesn't make sense, let me know. We have Jesus. He fulfills his identity as the Son of God. So being successful in our destiny is not the ultimate fulfillment. Okay, being successful in your identity is not the ultimate fulfillment. But being successful in fulfilling a man's identity is important because they're the ones who are charged with the duty of moving ahead, continuing generations of, Abraham's descendants. That's the destiny, a man's destiny. Women, though, don't have one. We have a role and we have an identity, but women don't have an identity. Men can have a role and an identity, but women can't. We just have a role. We're women after all. We're women, and because of that biological notion that we are women, we are different from men, makes us unequal to men. My thoughts overall, chapters 2 and 3. I really like chapter 2 because I'm a journalist and I like that kind of stuff. I like reading about things that influence other people's lives, especially media. Yeah, media just plays like a really big role in influencing women's lives back in the 1950s and 60s, and of course it still fills that role today. Chapter 3, it was okay. I really liked the big reveal of her thesis, and I love how she put it in chapter 3 and not chapter 1. It's not like you're writing an essay. This is a book, and you can put your thesis wherever you want to put it, I guess. I'm excited to see where she's going to go with her thesis, though, like what else she's going to do with it. So chapters 4 and 5 will come up next week. If you like, then comment below. I really like reading comments. Just let me know what you're thinking. Okay, bye.